Today is September the 4th, and this is Addison Shonland, and my guests today are Vinamra Longani and Nitin Sarin from Sarin Co, as you can see on their shirts, from India. And what we're going to do today is we're starting our first in a series, once a month, talking to these gentlemen about the Indian aviation scene. And we're titling this Indian Aviation During COVID, and this is the August update. Gentlemen, thank you so much for staying late at work tonight.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Yes.
So I guess we should start off by introducing our audience to Sarin, and maybe Nitin, you can do that.
Yes, that would be a pleasure. So to give everyone a background, we're a law firm specializing in aviation. We were set up in the year 1932, so a long time ago. And we're just a bunch of young people now who love aviation, and we are servicing some of the largest aircraft leasing companies in the world. So we are riding the wave, as they say, on the shoulders of Indian aviation, and let's see where that takes us.
Thank you. So let's start off today talking about recovery in the domestic in air travel in India. I had a very good conversation last week with somebody in Shanghai, and he was telling me that the Chinese domestic travel, of course, everybody's still inside their bubble, but on average, his sense is that there's a 70% load factor, but airfares are 1/3 of what they were a year ago. Gentlemen, what does it look like in India?
Okay, so to sort of start off by with China, and India often gets compared with China because of the where we are, and sort of not because of the size of the market, but really because we are these two large countries in aviation markets in this part of the world. So I mean, China has almost recovered the domestic market in China. Because of the holiday season now, they've got almost all the capacity which was lost due to COVID back, which is amazing. But one must keep in mind that they've sort of got a leash on the virus in the country. Now, coming to India, we're not very sure if we've peaked as yet. I mean, we added 80,000 plus COVID cases in a day yesterday, and
80,000?
I mean. 80,000 cases a day. We are a large country of 1.3 billion people. So when you sort of look at it in perspective, the numbers aren't too big. But if you don't put them in perspective, this is a huge number. So despite that, the Indian government had sort of suspended all flights within the country at the end of March, and airlines were allowed to resume flights at the end of May in a calibrated sort of manner, where the Ministry of Civil Aviation allowed them to add up to 33% of their original sort of summer 2020 approved schedule capacity, with the rider that fares are going to be capped. So what we have now is we've progressed in the sense that the cap, which stood at 33% now, was first moved to 45%, and now airlines are allowed to add up to 60% of capacity. Again, referring to load factors, we're averaging between 50 and 60%. So on 1/3 or 1/4 capacity, those figures aren't really very encouraging. And there's a couple of reasons for that, because India is a huge country. We've got a lot of states where respective states, depending on how they are battling with the virus, have got various internal sort of quarantine restrictions for people traveling within the country. And then I guess the virus at large, where, I mean, the numbers are encouraging. They've been picking up. I mean, to give you an idea, yesterday, we had 120 odd thousand people who took to the skies in India. So this is, if you were to look at it, compare it to the numbers we did in the previous years, we did these kind of numbers in 2007, 2006. So as of now, if this recovery was to stall for whatever reason that may be, the virus has pushed us back 13 odd years. And let's hope that doesn't happen. But again, it completely depends on the way this virus sort of where it takes us.
That's an amazing set of numbers there, Vin. It's interesting. Our analysis of what's going on in the States is that it appears that we have had a bit of a stall because obviously we're now beyond the summer vacation traffic. Now it's back to hardcore business traffic. And I have to tell you, a dream came true, and I'm going on a business trip in a week's time. So this is my first time since February. But the interesting thing here is that if we look at the US national domestic airline infrastructure and airport infrastructure, we're carrying about 20%, 25% of what the capacity is. So the industry is over capacity on airplanes and people and airports by 80%.
Yeah.
And so it's just, sharing that metric as a context for what you're saying. Bilateral agreements for international travel to and from India must be the same issue that obviously my friend in China and I were talking about, the bubble. And I see this week that the US airlines, the big three, are trying to get traffic against the North Atlantic to come back again because that's such a big money spinner. What is the situation in terms of India and going outside the bubble?
Well, I'm going to take that question. So, saying, keeping in mind, I come from a legal background. So just for perspective's sake, from 1944, there has been nothing, there's nothing known as an air bubble. It's something completely alien. It's, it stood the time of, decades and decades where, from the night after, the Great World Wars, where people decided that, civil aviation needs a special place in all regulation. So let's enter into bilateral air service agreements. This is the first time bilateral air service agreements have essentially been suspended, and this whole notion of a bubble has come into place. So from a legal perspective, it throws up a lot of interesting questions as to the legal basis of it, and whether it's really tenable under law or not. But then again, COVID is something that no one could have foreseen. So now, going to the practical aspect of, air bubbles, India being a country of 1.3 billion people is, it's that number is just unfathomable. So we have a large workforce who works around the world. And the reason why the government has entered into all these air bubbles is because imagine all of those people coming back at once. If we had opened up our, airports, all of this influx with mandatory quarantine, it's impossible. It's impossible to, we work for a lot of American airlines, and it's been 6 months now, and the demand hasn't fallen for people who want to travel from the US to India. It's staggering the number of people who work overseas. And, we're looking at numbers from, the Middle East, from the Gulf. If all of those people come back in, one shot, the government's not going to have the infrastructure in place to cater to all of that. And, just to add, we have a mandatory, 7 days of institutional quarantine and 7 days of home quarantine. And on an average, it's taking people 7 to 8 hours to clear immigration, clear the COVID screening, etc. Once you get off the aircraft, once you leave the airport, is taking 7 to 8 hours. So
wow,
imagine
so entering India.
Entering India, yes.
8 hours.
It is. It's absolutely shocking, because just the volume of people who are coming back. Because when you go through pandemics like this, you'd much rather be home. It's a much more comforting factor. So those are the scary figures which people have. And the thing is, the West will never understand the complexities of having 1.3 billion. And when I say 1.3 billion, this was our 2000, and we're already a decade old in that number. So I'm fairly certain we're at 1.5, 1.6, 1.7.
Yeah.
So the numbers are absolutely staggering. So it's it's just mind-boggling. So it's,
That, Nitin, that's an amazing set of numbers there, because you're right. Probably outside of India, very few people can comprehend that, that kind of sheer volume and the infrastructure that it needs
Mhm.
to be able to handle that flow. Which
And
brings
just
it.
to add, sorry to interject, just another very important point. I draw a comparison, when people ask me, oh, what's the Indian perspective about COVID? And I said that common Indian doesn't care about COVID. When you're more worried about earning your daily wage and putting a meal on your family's table, you don't care whether you get a cough or cold or what happens. So these are ground realities of how things work, and it's really scary. So, but we're
Mm.
doing
And
the best we can.
just to add to what Nitin was saying, the 7-day institutional quarantine. So I mean, understandably, because of COVID, we've seen people lose their jobs and livelihoods abroad. A majority of our the workforce in the Gulf is from India. So you have so many of those people, along with their families, who lost their jobs and lost their livelihoods, who are coming back now. A lot of them are sort of like construction workers or workers who might not be able to afford the 7-day institutional quarantine. So for people like that, the government of India is sort of arranging quarantine facilities at their own expense. So, and these numbers are mind boggling. So imagine if India was to open the borders and say, well, everything's going to be fine, all scheduled airlines can resume operations as it were. The number of people coming in, it would be impossible to quarantine or arrange institutional quarantine facilities for them. And the other thing I wanted to add was what India has also sort of recently done is, now if you're coming back to India and if you get RT-PCR COVID test done, which is negative 96 hours before your departure, wherever you're leaving from, and if it's negative, you upload it on a website. So when you land, you're sort of given like a unique ID number. All of this is being done. I mean, we are the IT capital of the world, at least. Well, I know some people say the Silicon Valley is, but I think all of that is really the focus of power is shifting to the east. And I'm glad we're doing this so that everybody in the States who watches it can get our perspective. So what the government of India has done is, everybody who now travels to India, they've automated the process. You can upload all your documents. You can upload this negative test report. You get a unique ID number. You get off the plane and you literally breeze through sort of like, quarantine, airport health officials, just because everything's in place. So yeah, I mean, a lot is being done, but like we said, it's the numbers, those are mind boggling. And that is why I guess bilaterals as they were will possibly remain suspended, and bubbles are going to be the way forward.
Gentlemen, that's amazing stuff. It's really great perspective. So Indian Airlines, though, domestically, you said, are now starting to fly again.
Mhm.
And a statistic that I got from The Economist, which I love to repeat, was that more people travel by train in India in one day than fly in India in 1 year. I guess that number, that kind of ratio still stands.
Mhm.
The question is, of course, India's airlines are very aggressive. And you've got some strange fuel tax situation there, but never mind. The fact is, though, Indian Airlines, with all this growth and then the topsy-turvy thing with the virus, what is the financial situation across the industry about now?
Well, I'll take that one if that's okay with you, Nitin.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, all airlines the world over are bleeding at this point in time, because traffic is down big time. And that's the case with airlines in India too. The real issue with India as a market is, we are a high cost market where the cost of operation is well, exponentially high compared to a lot of the markets in Southeast Asia or even in the West, because of taxes on fuel and just generally the cost of aviation infrastructure. And more importantly, because airlines are so aggressive in the country, we offer some of the cheapest airfares on the planet. So, I mean, I do remember reading a survey which was done somewhere in Europe, and India offered the cheapest fares in the world. And and yes, like you rightly said, Addison, airlines compete with trains. Though I must add, at this point in time, our trains are completely suspended. None of our trains. Well, there are very few passenger trains that are plying, and those are really for people who would never be able to afford to fly. So, you know, the government is sort of facilitating movement of migrant workers within the country. Those are the only trains that are plying. Coming back to the state of airlines, we have one large airline, which as a country we are extremely proud of because of what Indigo has achieved. They have 270 plus aircraft, an Indian brand built from scratch. Not many people would know Indigo. Indigo means and stands for India on the go. That is how the name sort of came about. This is something that I learned when I was doing some research on the airline. And essentially, Indigo did everything right. Indigo basically set all the wrongs right of all the legacy airlines which were operating at that point in time, be it Air India or Jet Airways at that point in time. They got into large sale and leaseback deals. They ordered hundreds of planes, and essentially all low-cost airlines that came after, including some of the current full-service airlines, they all follow the sale and leaseback model. So airlines in India essentially depend largely on the sale and leaseback income to sort of make up for whatever what the meager profits they make, if any at all, by actually sort of flying passengers. So now the issue is we have asset-light airlines who are dependent on inducting brand new planes so that the new ones come in, they earn you a little bit of money, you add capacity, and it's all reliant on traffic growing. What COVID has done is, traffic is obviously stalled. Aviation was literally shut down. While everything was shut down, fixed costs obviously remain, including things like lease rentals for aircraft, which have got to be paid irrespective. I mean, yes, airlines obviously are trying to negotiate with lessors to try and see if they can come up with some sort of an arrangement. But to cut the long story short, apart from Indigo, which has sizable cash in the bank, all other airlines at this point in time are struggling with liquidity. And that is where, because the Indian government didn't really, unlike the US government, I mean, to an extent, can't even afford to bail out the aviation industry because we've got larger issues at hand. We have a population to feed who haven't been able to work or earn a living. So what they've done is, interestingly, these caps, these fare caps and all capacity caps which have been put in, there a vast majority of people seem to think it's unfair, and demand and supply should sort of govern how many flights are put in and what fares people should pay. But these caps, what they've done is they've now ensured that the cash poor airlines, which is majority of them, have a little bit of room to survive because, I mean, theoretically, because of the cash reserves that India's largest airline now has, if these caps were not there, within a week, they could flood the market with cheap fares and basically fly their entire fleet. And within a week, the other airlines won't stand a chance and they'll be bankrupt.
Wow.
Yep.
Of course, there's the perennial Indian airline that all of us outside India have definitely heard about, which is Air India, which is constantly for sale.
Yes.
What news do we have on that?
Well, I mean, to give credit to everybody at Air India, they were the ones who who at least were started bringing Indians back. Because to begin with, I mean, India set out this Vande Bharat mission, which was basically possibly the world's largest repatriation exercise undertaken by any country. And Air India, spearheaded this initiative. So one's got to give credit to Air India for that. But to answer your question, the Air India sale it's still up for sale, and we hope that hope against hope that we do find someone. The Ministry of Civil Aviation is very hopeful and they've said repeatedly there is sizable interest in the airline. But I guess this is one of those situations where we just got to wait and watch.
Okay.
until then, it's just the taxpayer that foots the bill. So there are a lot of sour apples along the way because it's not the ideal situation. Everyone's very grateful for what they do, but at the same time, there are billions and billions of dollars of taxpayers' money that are being sunk into Air India. Just a different perspective.
Sure, I understand that. So it's interesting. You were talking about briefly the how India's airlines are having to renegotiate with the lessors, and obviously the sale and leaseback model is really key here. We hear about, from the reporting from the leasing business or leasing companies that they're all trying, so much of their customer base is in dire need of help, and they're all trying to figure out something. Is there any detail or any granular information you can share on how that's working out in India?
That's right, up our alley. So since we service a lot of aircraft lessors, we do have first-hand information on what's happening. So in general, the larger players are, they have more cushion to play with. So they are just withdrawing aircraft from India. That's been our experience. But some of the not so larger lessors, and don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about small lessors, I'm even talking about middle rank, sort of just below the top lessors, are in a conundrum because, this is the first time where you've got a defaulting, set of lessees, but at the same time, you don't want to take your aircraft back, because you don't have any place in the world to place them. So we are seeing a lot of interesting, transactions happening, or just discussions happening where lessors are willing to give a lease rental holiday as long as the airline parks the aircraft in a jurisdiction or an airport where they have access to the plane. So the biggest fear right now is that the government is going to step in and pass some law or regulation where lessors cannot repossess aircraft. Our information is from first-hand from the government saying that that's not going to happen. But at the same time, that's everyone's fear. India has been notorious for, having regulations which are just difficult, and they are difficult. So we are seeing all sorts of strange arrangements coming to play where, as I said, people are paying a premium and saying, okay, we'll take a rental holiday as long as you park the aircraft where we have access to it. We have lessors who are just ignoring the problem, saying that I'm really sorry, but you owe us this money and we are going to, action it whether you like it or not. And for the first time, airlines, are being served default notices and are saying, okay, guys, we've defaulted. Please take your planes back. But the lessors, doesn't want their plane back. Right. So it's a very strange sort of situation, and we don't know where we're going to end up. And that has resulted in both lessees and lessors being very secretive. So we work for a number of lessors who are, we don't know what's happening because they don't want legal counsel involved at all. So it's just on a commercial basis that people are having discussions, and we'll see where it works out because both of them have been hurt really badly. And the aspect which people don't talk about is that a lot of lessors are also in default. So lessors are not, these big cash-rich companies. They also have debt and they also have obligations, and they haven't been able to service those obligations. So it goes up the chain. So you've got lessee, lessor, bank on top of lessor. So ultimately, we're looking at a lot of decisions being taken by the big banks in the world.
I had a conversation maybe a couple of months ago at the start of the crisis with a person who, I don't want to mention their name, but a well-seasoned executive in this industry, recently retired. And he said an interesting thing to me. He said, we need to understand that we're in this commercial aviation silo. Mm-hmm. And the way that it works is that passengers fly, and the passengers flying cargo to an extent, but essentially passenger traffic is the water that comes into the top of the silo, then drifts down to everybody in it. And absent that water or that revenue coming from passenger traffic, everybody in the silo goes thirsty. Yeah. And I think that what you're saying here, Nitin, is that what we're sensing too, that everybody in the silo, job one is to survive. And the way to survive is to protect the silo. So there's new kinds of flexibility required from everybody. Don't push, don't irritate everybody, protect the silo. Because as you see now with China, there is a dawn, a morning is coming. The darkness that we're in is going to end. And you need to be alive at the back end of this, at that morning, at the first rays of dawn, to move forward. So everybody's just got to hunker down. I think that's it's a consistent message that I'm hearing.
Absolutely, and it's it's strange. Just to give an example, we would assume that profits we're making or work that we're getting would slow down during COVID. No, people in India are buying private jets. There are sale and lease backs happening. There are repossessions happening. There's a lot of work that's happening for us, and so we are very confused. When someone says, "Oh, it's COVID," there's nothing happening, but what we are seeing on the ground is completely different, and it's not that people are not showing what money they have. People are getting that money from somewhere. So I to be honest, I'm extremely confused as to what's happening. And to be very honest, I don't know whether this is the right stage to bring up this issue, since you talked about darkness and China coming out of that first. But people have to remember that the difference between China and the rest of the world is you have a different regime, and then you have democracy in most parts of the world. And we as Indians are going to take that hit because we are slow, we are sloppy, because we are a democracy. That's our biggest advantage, and that's our biggest downfall. If anyone's going to believe that China's got away with 83,000 cases of COVID, I'm really sorry, but the disease travels the same way as it does with Chinese people as it does with India. So there's no reason for us to have 3 million versus 83,000. So it's my personal opinion. It's not the opinion of the firm. I just don't believe it. So those numbers can be put in different perspectives, and I think we have a long, long, long way to go when we get out of this, but we will. I think humans are a resilient bunch, and before we know it, we would have bounced back with some vaccine or not.
And we all pray every day for that vaccine to come quickly.
Absolutely. I mean, Addison, have you ever heard of humans not finding a vaccine for anything except for extreme extreme diseases? This is not one of those. When we humans want to do something, we do it.
Right. It's interesting that what we're having here in our lifetime is, and it may be really like this the first time ever, that there is a global impact of something like this, and the global community can respond and critically collaborate, because we all suffer, or we all get through this together. And it's not just the aviation industry. Everybody has to understand. I was speaking to somebody about this recently. It's amazing when you think that human beings, 5 blood types.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep.
There's a lot more that makes us the same than makes us different.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
And what I've seen it's tremendous. What I've seen in the commercial aviation space, the kindness, the tolerance, we have these massive layoffs coming, and the kindness and the consideration of people to each other. It's a wonderful thing. It's too bad we had to go through this terrible shock for that goodness to come out. But we're humans. We learn by mistakes, I guess.
I agree with that. And, I've said this once or twice before. The fact that we've been thrown back into, 2003, 2004, 2005 time, of numbers, means we can just learn from our mistakes. We have the market. It's not like, we've been thrown back into a dark age at some point where it's going to take the same amount of progression to reach where we are in 2020. So the moment things get okay, we will bounce back equally, quickly. And that's what we are at our firm. This is not a marketing gimmick, but it's just, I just had this thought the other day that we weren't aviation people in 2003, but now we've been given this opportunity to be aviation people in 2003 and build it back to what it was. And there's just bigger waves to ride for, and that applies across the globe. People are going to make more money, people are going to be equally prosperous, there's no question about it. So it's just, how far can you, look down the road? And it's not so far. If you're talking about another year also in the time scale of the human race, it's absolutely nothing. So.
Right. All right, gentlemen. So let's wrap this with a last comment. Then, give me some sort of sense of an outlook. Now, obviously, we'll speak of hopefully, excuse me, we'll speak again in a month. We'll probably speak beforehand, but on Zoom in a month.
Yeah.
What do you see as the outlook for the next, let's say, from today, look 90 days forward? What do you guys see for India?
Well, I guess, honestly, Addison, it's like if I had a crystal ball, I could look into it and tell you what it'll be like, but nobody has one of those. So it actually depends on how the virus behaves. I mean, if one was to look at the numbers, India is unfortunately adding record numbers back to the total on a daily basis. I mean, yes, we've got to put it in perspective, but like, for example, New Delhi. I mean, Delhi is India's largest airport. Not just India's largest airport, it almost did 70 million passengers a year last year. So, we're actually a regional hub, New Delhi International Airport. Now, in Delhi, we added 2,900 cases yesterday in a day. And this figure about a couple of weeks back had gone down to about 700 in a day. So we're now adding cases rapidly again as India unlocks and sort of opens things up now. So we're starting to open, for example, like the local sort of commuter trains in the city are going to open next week. So, and they've been shut for months now. So at the local markets are open. Cinema halls aren't, but I guess those will be open too, obviously with social distancing guidelines, which may or may not be followed. So as we open, and that's the conundrum that the government faces now, we've got to give people an opportunity to earn their livelihood. However, because we're opening everything up again now, and do remember, India had one of the world's strictest lockdowns. For 40 days, we literally had the police on the roads ensuring we didn't step out of the house because we were not allowed to. So now, as you open things up, the cases are rising again. So it's anyone's guess how this is going to proceed or where we will be in 90 days' time. An optimistic view would be that we will continue to build on the traffic and we would reach 50% or 60% of our figures, or pre-COVID figures by the end of the year. However, do we know what is going to happen once we hit a certain number of cases every day in cities? And would we go back into some sort of a lockdown, if not everything? So these are questions which I guess no one has answers to, and we would only know as this scenario plays out. But one thing is for sure, the promoters of our airlines, except obviously India's largest airline, Indigo, which has got a sizable amount of cash in the bank, the promoters, and the promoter for Air India is the government of India because it is a government-owned airline. The promoters do need to bring in cash in order to sustain operations in whatever possible way and to ramp up operations, because otherwise what we will have is a cash-rich airline adding record capacity because they can, and the others unable to add capacity because they don't have cash in the bank. So we don't want that happening. And ultimately, irrespective whatever happens 90 days later, the promoters really need to bring in cash to their airlines.
Yeah, and just to add, I don't think we will grow in the next 90 days just because of the sheer volume of our population and traveling public. But at the same time, it's not going to go back to previous levels because people are scared. It's just people are scared of the unknown. So you'll have a large part of the traveling public who's not going to travel. You're going to have the guys who are, fairly confident, who will be traveling. So, and even if you do get a vaccine by November, it's going to be at least, but it's going to take us at least a year to roll it out in India and get people vaccinated. So, I don't think it's going to change much in the next 90 days.
And more importantly, because you love the railways so much, Addison, if the trains come back on, they're going to be competing again with the airlines. And remember, airfares are regulated at this point in time. So, airlines aren't really being able to discount fares to get people to put bums on seats. So once the railways are back on in whatever sort of calibrated manner, they would be competing head on with the airlines. So that is another challenge. It'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Gentlemen, it's been a lovely conversation. This is our first one, and I have to say, this went really nicely. I really enjoyed it. So thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. It's been our pleasure. You too.